So here we are, guys, welcome to another episode of Tackle Room Talk. Now, I've had lots of messages on YouTube and my socials just asking me sort of what floats I use for commercial fishing and when I would use them. So I thought, what a better opportunity, do a little video, run through my commercial floats that I use and why I use them. So starting it off, kicking it off, we're going to go straight to the F1 side of shallow fishing, and the two floats I use are the Preston Tyson and the Preston F1 Shallow. Now the reasons I use them, you don't have to use the same make floats as I'm using. You know, it's all about the reasons you're using them. So the Tyson to start with is a very small dibber. Now I love fishing dibbers for F1s, anything between sort of 18 inches and sort of the top layers of the water. I think they're a lot more direct and they're a lot better for slapping over and fishing in that shallow water. Now anything deeper than 18 inches, or if I was fishing in the winter and I had my shot strung out so I was having a slower fall of the rig, I would use this. Now the F1 Shallow. Now basically I'd use this because it's got a carbon stem and it's got a bristle on it. So I know that if I'm fishing deeper than 18 inches, I can watch the float and watch how it follows the bait through. And if I'm fishing sort of shallow with maggots and stuff like that in sort of the autumn or the winter months, where I'm fishing strung out sort of shotting patterns and watching the rig fall through the water, I know that I can watch that float go through the water and I can gauge where the fish are in the water, but also I can watch my rig working, and any indications on that tip, I know where those fish are in the layers. So they're my two F1 rigs. Now, carp shallow. Now if I'm fishing for sort of proper carp shallow, it's a bit different. So first up, the carp shallow. Now same as the F1 shallow, the reason I use this is so my rig follows the bait through the water. Now with carp fishing, a lot of the time you were slapping a rig over and you're not having any weights down the rig. So you're not having the float follow the rig through, but it needs to follow the bait through. So when you're slapping sort of pellets, bunches of maggots, 2 or 3 casters on the hook, a big worm, whatever you're fishing shallow, meat, you want to be slapping that rig in or laying that rig in, and that sort of float following it through. So I think with this bristle and the F1, the carp shallow, sorry, with that bristle and the 5-glass stem, it does follow the rig through. So that's the sort of float I would use for fishing, general carp fishing, slapping a 6mm pellet, fishing, 2 or 3 maggots on your hook, casters on your hook, or a big worm or something like that. Now the next thing the next float I use, which is like sort of specialist really for fishing places like Barston, Larford, all these venues, Meadowlands, where you're slapping big pellets over for carp and you're fishing for big carp. So if you're slapping 8mm pellets or 10mm pellets or a big worm or something like that, a big bait, that's the float I use there. Now that's the Mugger. So that's got a 3mm bristle on it so it can suspend sort of the bigger baits. Now that's what I would use for sort of fishing up in the water with big pellets, big baits. So that's the reason I use that float. So then we go into sort of the sort of deeper fishing. So first up is the F1 Maggot. Now the F1 Maggot is a brilliant float. It's got a carbon stem, 1.5mm bristle. Now I would use this for all my sort of fishing where it was like mixed fishing. So if I was fishing for F1s, or I was fishing for F1s and carp, or if I was fishing for skimmers in the summer, big bags of silvers in the summer, that's the float I would be using. Now it's a brilliant float all round, very strong. That's the float I'd be using. Now on the flip side of that, if where's he gone? On the floor. On the flip side of that, if I was fishing for big carp and it was majority of carp, not F1s, I'd use that. Now that's an excess carp. It's got a 3mm bristle again. So it's a big bristle for big carp, for big baits. If I was fishing for, you know, big carp, or if it was deep margins, so like places like Western Pools where that margins are really deep, that's the float I'd be using. It's a slim float, big bristle, 5 glass stem. That's the float I'd be using for big carp, fishing big blown pellets on Woodland View, short on Larford for big carp, down the edges, deep margins on Western. That's what I'd be using. So then it brings me on to the diamond. Now I'd use a diamond float like this if I was fishing luncheon meat or big pellets, the same as the excess carp, but if there was a little bit of toe on it and it was a little bit deeper than sort of most venues. So if there was a bit of toe on it and it was like 5 foot deep, I'd be using a diamond, just because the shape of the body, obviously the excess carp's got a slim body. The shape of this diamond body just allows me to hold on to the rig a little bit more. So if I was fishing deeper margins or deeper like short lines and it was a bit of toe on the water, a bit of wind on the water, I'd opt for one of them. And then last but not least, the power. Now, I'd use the power float if it was like windy and it was a deep venue. So like if I was going to Larford and I was pinging pellets on the long pole, or I was pinging meat on the long pole on Larford Specimen Lake, where you're sort of fishing depths of like 9, 10, 12 foot of water, Meadowlands even. There's a lot of places around the country it's got deep sort of swims, Pollowing on the Match Lake and White Acres. So if I was fishing for like carp or mixed fishing and I'm fishing in a deeper water, I'd use that power float there. It's a strong float. It's got a upside down rugby ball sort of shape body. It has got a hollow plastic tip, and that's the float I'd be using for like all my deeper fishing. Now we mentioned margin fishing. Now let's go into a bit of margin and island fishing. So if I was fishing margins from like 2 foot down, that's the float I would use. Now that's a press and edge float. And that's one of my favourite float sizes. I've caught loads and loads of big weights on that. Anything between sort of 16 inches and 2 foot, that is my go-to float. It's very strong. It's got quite a big bristle on it, 2.5mm bristle. Very, very strong. Never lets me down. And like I said, if you're fishing deep sort of margins, like at Western Pools, then I go back to that excess carp, just because it's a little bit longer float, a little bit more stable, designed for sort of deeper venues really. Now, the other thing that I'd have to touch on, which would cover all of your commercial fishing, and is fishing against islands. So if I was fishing up against islands with pellets and a various different amounts of bait, I'd fish the carp shallow again. So for general fishing up against islands, you know, fishing corn, meat, pellets, worms, whatever you're fishing up against the island, that's the float I'd be using. It's a carp shallow. And last but not least, if I was fishing what they call the mud line, so if I was fishing up against a mud line and it was quite shallow and you're fishing up against shallow water, I'd be back on the mugger. So the mugger, I think, is a perfect float for fishing right up in that shallow water, up against the mud line. It's a very short, dumpy float. Like I said, it's got a 3mm bristle, so you're not going to sort of be striking a line bite. You're going to wait for that float to bury and you're going to have a proper bite on it. But because it's so little, you could fish in sort of 10 inches of water and still get regular bites on that. The float is quite small, quite short float. So that's a very good float for fishing up against the mud line. So that's all my commercial floats run through. You know, I'm using Preston floats. That's because I'm sponsored by Preston. You don't have to buy Preston floats. You don't have to use Preston floats. Obviously, the ones that I've been using are very, very good, and they're very good for those situations that I've just spoke about. But if you want to use a different make float, just look for those characteristics of the things I just showed you. So you want a dibber for fishing shallow, 18 inches or shallower. You want and float with a bristle on for fishing deeper than that. You want to float with a bristle on for fishing for carp. You want to float with a quite thick bristle on for slapping big pellets over for these big carp in these big places like Larford and Barston. And in the same way, your sort of deeper rigs, do you mean you need those same characteristics? The 1.5mm bristle, the 3mm bristle, very strong carbon stems, fiberglass stems. You want to just match whatever float you want to use to the situation and why you're using it. So I hope that sort of describes a little bit of what floats I use in what situations and why. And hopefully, you can learn a little bit. And if you do go to a venue and you want to pick a certain float, try and pick it so that it matches the right situation. So I hope you learned a little bit, and keep tuned, and we'll do a few more of these tackle room talks. Cheers, guys.